Hello, YouTube and Wooper Club fans. It's me, Fruit Taco, coach of the Route 1 Burbs, bringing you a very special match here. We've got the championship, the final match of WCL Season 13. We've got the Buffalo Bouffalant going up against the Waterdeep Wobbuffets, and, well, I've got some help here in covering this match. I've got the coaches of each team. I've got IllLogic with the Buffalo Bouffalant and SteveChuck with the Waterdeep Wobbuffets joining me. How are you guys doing?
This is nice. It's a little bit of a role reversal, right? Usually we're the hosts on here, but now we get to be on your show here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it is fantastic to be here and go over this finals match and the season.
Yeah, it's been a very exciting season. I don't think anyone's necessarily surprised to see the two of you as potential champions here. You guys are both easily renowned as two of the top teams in the league, but it's been a little bit since a championship win for either of you. You guys have any thoughts on kind of making it back to the finals and going for a win?
Yeah, I'll start with my own history. I did join the league in season two and started off real hot. Got to win the seasons 2, 3, 4, 6, and partnered up with the Newport Noctels for the season 9 championship. But it's actually been a little bit then since I've been able to make the finals. Right, that season 9 was with another team. So as far as singles go, we actually have to go back to season 6. So despite winning four of the first 5 championships, it's actually been a bit. It feels like I finished near the top every single time in the regular season, but something trips me up. It's usually you, Michael. Thanks a lot for that. That prevents me from getting back to the finals. So pretty nice to see a familiar face from the league, but not someone I faced in the finals yet here across from me.
Yeah, I mean, my history, of course, season one, the champ, as well as the regular season top there, and since then it's been a little bit downhill. Haven't won a championship since there. Did make it to the finals in season seven, but a lot slower. A perennial top team, definitely always up there, but usually a roughly a semifinals exit, a game away or so, sometimes in the quarters. Always in the playoffs though, always into the conversations, but would be really nice to get another win so that I can at least get one win while Nate is also in the league.
Yeah, well, it's certainly great to see both of you returning to champion form. So, without further ado, let's dive into the match. Okay, so the Buffalo Bouffalant, we've got Hisuian Sneasel, Tauros, Sandy Shocks, who can't Terra, Hisuian Arcanine, who can't Terra, Baxcalibur, who can't Terra, Rotom Fan, Gardevoir, Wo-Chien, Hippowdon, Fortress, and Slowking, who can't Terra, there at the end of the team, going up against the Waterdeep Wobbuffets with the Hisuian Electrode, Inteleon, Galarian Zapdos, who can't Terra, Indeedee, Bramblegast, Goodra, Armarouge, who can't Terra, Magnezone, Donphan, Enamorous Therian, who can't Terra, and Slowking again, who can't Terra, rounding it out at the end there, but it is Galarian Slowking. Battle of the Slowking teams here. Looking at, this matchup, I think both of these teams have a lot going for them. The Hisuian Electrode on the Wobbuffets, gives them that, and the Inteleon give them kind of the edge in the top speed, but then the Bouffalant have the next three fastest mons. Both of you guys have boosting. Both of you guys have plenty of threats and plenty of defensive mons. I think it's a pretty good matchup here. What did you guys kind of think when you sat down looking at this? Nate, we'll start with you.
Yeah, the first thing I noticed were actually those bottom 3 mons on the Wobbuffets. The Slowking Galar, the Enamorous Therian, and the Donphan all looked just super good into my team, honestly. Very impressed with things like seeing Steve use the Future Sight from Slowking to be able to teleport out into Enamorous for that very strong Moonblast. Those are a couple moves that's very tough to resist with just about anything. Add in the Donphan for hazard control, general ability to stop most physical attackers. And this was actually looking kind of tough at first for me. It actually made it, I think, very difficult to bring some of my tanks to, in particular, just because of those. Something like Wo-Chen that's been able to wall things all season. I'm going to need to commit a Terra to it, but what's a good Terra to wall both the Enamorous and some of that Slowking nonsense? Hippowdon is more so a physical wall. Same with Fortress. Don't really count as very good walls too. Steve's mostly special team, which made it a little bit tough, especially if I wanted to still check something like that Zapdos Galar. But really, I do like my matchup overall here. The 3 mons that stand out to me are the Baxcalibur, Arcanine Hisui, and Sandy Shocks. In particular, ground plus coverage for something like the Enamorous seem to really just tear up Steve's team. Excalibur with ice and ground coverage hits, I believe, 8 or 9 of his mons super effectively with just those 2 moves. Sandy Shock's able to replicate very much the same thing, and if Arcanine Zooey could somehow find a way through that Dawn Fan, it could similarly dominate. So actually, my offense might be able to out-offense Steve's, especially if I can get my faster stuff out there compared to the slower stuff I'm expecting him to use. I'm a little potential worried about something like Trick Room, but I think those 3 high-tier mons for me in their offense, that's something I started to look to build around immediately.
Sure. And Steve, what about you? Kind of what did you see when you first sat down and looked at the matchup?
So the first thing I noticed is the Bouffalant overall great matchup into the psychic type with really only the Sneasel being weak to it, and that thing's made of paper anyways. Really unfortunate for the psychic terrain team who would very much like to spam the strong future sights and other psychic moves. But otherwise, I did have some offensive options. Enamorus has been a key piece for me throughout the season, and just between Moonblast, Earth Power, and maybe Mystical Fire, if I believe Fortress was coming, had a great chance to blow through a lot of the team, especially if it was able to get up like an agility with a weakness policy boost. Something like that could do very good. But as Nate mentioned, he had a lot of threats that were very much threatening to out offense me, especially the Excalibur, which my typical defensive answers didn't have great matchups into. Something I'd rely on to take care of that would be something like the Don Fan or the Magnezone, both of which would really struggle against the potential ice and ground coverage it could bring. So answering the Excalibur and then being able to out offense the rest of his team really did seem to be the way to go here.
Okay, well, that's some great insight. And, going from that, let's just dive into what each of you guys ended up bringing to the match. And we'll kick things off looking at the Bouffalant's 6 Mons here. Nate, why don't you just walk us through this team?
Sure. So I guess we have to start off with those top 2 mons, right? If I'm going to bring back Excalibur, I've got to bring the Slow King to help support that. So Slow King went the full special defense. As I said before, Steve's team seems very heavily specially inclined on his offensive sides there. So just max HP speed up with Sassy Nature. I did want to try and get the slower chili reception if possible, as well as having Surf for general coverage. It actually does quite a bit of damage to a lot of good neutral targets. T-Wave to be able to paralyze anything that's getting a little bit out of hand. Remember, I am trying to rely a little bit on getting some of that speed advantage over things like the Enamorus, and then, of course, Slack Off, people to stay in there as long as I can. If I am just in a 1v1 against something like Enamorus, I can actually start to win that with Slack Off. Very happy with the Culverberry decision here, too. A couple months is very much wanted to make sure I could beat or have the swap in on were the Dawn Fan and the Inteleon. The only way they really have to break through this is with Knockoff and Dark Pulse, respectively. So Culverberry made a lot of sense for me. Sucks that I couldn't find room for Boots, especially because, as you can see, I don't have hazard removal. But hopefully, with one of the mons we see later on, that would discourage him a little bit from setting T-Spikes, and hopefully that shift damage wouldn't accumulate too much, especially if I can slack off and find the opportunity to do so. But really, the start of the show is going to be that back Excalibur, right? Where, in fact, you're running Ice Body to be able to help with chili reception, get some defense boost, and start setting up behind a substitute with Dragon Dance, with the ice and ground coverage, with even a loaded dice, Icicle Spear, to be able to get a ton of damage. That's base 100 power, minimum 125. We get all 5. Adamant Nature didn't need the full attack stat, really just wanted an HP stat to be able to live. If I can get behind a substitute in the snow, to be able to have that live some hits from something like Dawn Fan, especially if I can get a burn off of that on that, which we'll see in just a moment there. If possible, Excalibur setting up to, say, +2, should be able to just kind of sweep depending on some kind of Terra nonsense potentially. But Icicle Spirit Earthquake, base 100s, it's just such good coverage against Steve. The Arcanine Hisui, I wanted an air balloon on this with Rockhead, Max Attack, Adamant, with Flare Blitz, Head Smash, Extreme Speed, and actually tech Will-O-Wisp in there. Will-O-Wisp, because I assume Donphan is the main thing that should come in to wall this. It's really the only mon that Steve has to be able to wall it. One of the best answers to Head Smash. Of course, Magzone doesn't want to switch in. Can't take a Flare Blitz, especially when I outspeed it. Air Balloon is a way to potentially get in a little bit safely. So even if we're at neutral, Steve will now be able to just kill me with Earthquake while I can get off the Will-O-Wisp. And suddenly Donphan, which again I think has to come, becomes a prime candidate to set up on with Excalibur. So a little bit centered around that gameplay. But even past that, just having Max Stack Adam and Head Smash to obliterate Enamorus, they seemed like a very good thing to me. And as much damage as we get on the Glow King, because that thing is a pain to get rid of. Next up, Sandy Shock's Choice Scarf. This is about the same set I brought last time. I did want Stealth Rock on there if possible, but otherwise Volt Switcher's Power Thunderbolt. Pretty standard. Timid to be able to outspeed the Jolly Zapdos in case that was scarfed as well. One of the only real revenge answers I have to Zapdos was this Sandy Shocks as well. I wanted to make sure I outsped that. And Electric and Ground are such good coverage. If I can predict correctly, then we are in a great spot. Maybe even just one prediction to break something down for Excalibur. I had a few choices for the last couple months. Went with the Gardevoir here with choice specs because I was very impressed with the damage. Really, a lot of this was down to can I 2-hit KO something like Enamorous or the Slowking, depending on the right set. And with modest choice specs, Moonblast and Psyshock pretty much do that. Shadow Ball against non-AV Slowkings as well, with Mystical Fire being able to take out the Magnezone as well in a couple of hits and being a generally good neutral move to hit. Grass is the Terror type, just in case Ground gets a little bit out of hand. You may have noticed I don't exactly have great Ground answers aside from the Air Balloon. So Ground Spam, something like Earth Power coming in. I need to be able to have an answer for that for sure. So Grass seemed like a decent answer, as well as for a Snipe Shot from Inteleon. Finally, the Hisuian Sneasel with the Eviolite. Just a little bit of bulk there, but otherwise need the max speed because after a Trailblaze, oh boy, can we go in Swords Dance Trailblaze with Gunk Shot to be able to hit Enamorous, and the Terra Blast Dark as my offensive answer. Hits a lot of the Psychic types there, especially the Glow King, as well as some like the Armoroosh, which would otherwise be able to tank some hits. If I can get up a Swords Dance, this thing can win actually, especially with the Trailblaze to outspeed some of those Skarts, and as well as having a Poison typing to potentially come in on Toxic Spikes. This was the last one I added. I thought for sure this wasn't going to come, but I really like that matchup offensively as well as the ability to dissuade Toxic Spikes, so I felt like it had to come. And actually really like the ability to sweep alongside the Excalibur. If one of them breaks something down, maybe the other one can sweep. So there's the team.
Yeah, I think it's a great team. I'm a little surprised to see it from you though. I definitely think of you as kind of one of the not a slow player, but a certainly you go for kind of more steady battles and not seeing something like the Wochien or the Hippowdon really just having that Slowking as your defensive backbone and everything else being very offensive is something that I wasn't necessarily expecting from you. But certainly, I think it's well thought out on kind of all counts. Certainly, that Baxcalibur is really, really scary. The Sneasel, I'm a little bit iffy on just because stuff like Swords Dance and Trailblaze, it's got that Eviolite, but it seems like it's gonna want a fair amount of time in there to really be able to put in the work. We'll just have to see if it's able to stick around and do all of that. Steve, you have any thoughts kind of seeing this team? Were you expecting some of this?
There are definitely things here I was expecting. The Gardevoir is something that stands out as something that was unexpected. There were some of my calcs that when I was looking at that, it's like Gardevoir kind of answers this. When we get to my team, I can talk a little more about it. But decisions where I almost wanted to ignore the Gardevoir, but mainly chose options to account for a potential like Terra Fairy Wo-Chien. And good thing I had those options after seeing Gardevoir in the lineup.
All right. Well, without further ado, then let's move on and see what you are bringing. So I think I'll just pass the torch right to you, Steve. What are you bringing here?
So, for my team, we'll start off at the top with the Slow King as well. Glow King here. Um, Maximum defense here. Better take hits from the largely physical Bouffalant's team. Worried about especially the Excalibur and the Arcanine having, kind of a not great answer, but at least a good secondary option for attacks like that. Um, and then having Toxic, Slack Off, Protect, and Future Sight. Toxic is for the kind of low king Ditto, able to hopefully set up poison and slowly win that long term battle. Decided not to go something like T Spikes after our previous match, where there was, I believe, 3 Terra Poison Mons ready to switch around and clear off the spikes. So decided to go for the more direct route, as Slowking does definitely have the bulk, especially with the maximum defense to take a couple hits and get off, one hit in the right situations. Second mon, then, the Zapdos Galar weakness policy. This here is probably the set I was most excited about coming in and the possibilities it had. 52 speed allows Zapdos to outspeed a Scarf Sandy Shocks, even if it does go max speed instead of creeping down one. Um, that does open up the possibility of being outsped. I'm sorry, with the agility up. Let's clarify that. Does open up the possibility to be outsped by a Scarf Sneasel Hisui. However, I did notice that Sneasel Hisui is able to go adamant in this matchup without losing out on any outspeeding anything because of the speed gaps in my team. And with that, an agility at this speed tier would definitely get me above even a +1 Sneasel. So it felt like a good choice there. Adamant max attack with a weakness policy boost decimates nearly everything. And depending on setup opportunities, a bulk up to get the rest of the way certainly would be able to one shot everything in the right situation. It's just a matter, though, of getting up that, especially the agility and the weakness policy proc. Went for the safer moves here. Acrobatics over Brayford, because after proccing weakness policy, I won't have a lot of HP to spare on recoil damage, and wanted to make sure with the fighting move I did not drop my own defenses. The HP and special defense, I took my leftover EVs and figured out what would allow me to take the minimum amount from a Sandy Shocks Volt Switch into an Arcanine E-Speed. This is the combination that gave me the best odds into that particular combination of moves. It's still not a guarantee to survive from what I was calculating against, but it gave me the best odds, and that seemed to me like the most reasonable way the weakness policy would be triggered, and then the revenge killer that would hopefully, well, I guess in my case, hopefully not be able to take out Zapdos in return. The Enamorous went with a little bit of a different set this time. Moonblast and Earth Power, I mentioned, have great coverage together. I suspected Nate would not bring the Fortress this time around, so I opted not to bring Mystical Fire, going for a couple other moves. Opted for Tailwind here over Agility. As the season's gone on, Enamorous has gotten worse and worse at sweeping as people have become more prepared for it. Tailwind was a way to still provide that sweeping option for Enamorous, but if Enamorous is forced to switch out, give somebody else the ability to benefit from that speed. Maybe get the chance for like Udra to come in later and get off an Acid Armor before something else happens, and Taunt to shut down things like the Slow King or perhaps the Wo-Chien or Slack Off on the Hippo. Anything that I definitely want to shut down. Helmet to do some chip. I was kind of struggling on what item to use here. Figured Helmet will definitely do something. Also, this was kind of mostly going to come in on the Wo-Chien and get knocked off. So that was an item that would at least do something in that instance. Armor Rouge, Choice Scarf, Weak Armor. Really big set here. Maximum defense. This, after I mentioned that the Excalibur was the big thing I was worried about with this matchup and how it kind of tore through my team. And Armor Rouge is actually my best answer to an Ice type attack and still handles the non-stab Earthquake fairly well. So that was Armor Rouge's job here, was to come in on the Excalibur and take a hit, which it certainly can do. The speed allows it to, at +2, outspeed a +1 Excalibur. And then it has Destiny Bond to trade with the Excalibur. If it came out earlier, it also had the ability to trick away a Choice Scarf onto a defensive wall. I imagine Slow King would have been a pretty prime switch in if Armor Rouge was out, thinking it was an offensive option. Being able to trick a Choice Scarf onto that and cripple it for the rest of the match. And then did bring some offensive moves on the off chance that I needed to do something offensive here. Armor Cannon for its great stab, and then in the case where Destiny Bond wasn't the move to click into Excalibur and it was running Thermal Exchange, I needed something to hit it, so I ended up bringing Aura Sphere as the best option there. And then in the back too, I have a couple of options to kind of round up a little bit of bulk to add some more survivability to the team to what I thought would be a little bit of a longer, kind of more stally battle. Donphan with leftovers, Terra Dragon for the Arcanine's Flare Blitz. Nate correctly did surmise that Donphan is my best option into that, especially to a head smash, but wanted to have something to resist the incoming Flare Blitz while also not losing a... Well, I would lose the immunity to Volt Switch, but wanted to keep at least a resist to a Sandy Shocks Volt Switch here. Very heavily specially defensive. I forget exactly what this calc was for, but was worried about Sandy Shocks coming in on Donphan, so wanted to avoid taking too much from an Earth power there, because Donphan does make a pretty good Sandy Shocks answer otherwise with its ground typing. Earthquake just for reliable damage, knockoff to disrupt, Stealth Rock to provide some hazards and protect for leftover recovery. Was considering Rapid Spin, but Nate had not favored hazards a ton this season, and especially in our last match. So I went with the gamble that he wasn't going to bring him, and I didn't need to bring Spin. And the last set here, Goopa the Gudra. Tried to get a bulky sweeper here. Acid Armor raising the defense stat, which was heavily invested with, although with the special defense nature, made Gudra very difficult for anything on his team to kill. The one thing that definitely could do it was the Excalibur, except in the case of a Terra Fairy, which would make it a lot harder to take out. Body Press does fantastic. Dragon Tail to force out some switches. And here is Sludge Bomb. Um, Definitely liked the abilities of Body Press and Dragon Tail to disrupt the team, maybe pick up some extra chip with Stealth Rock, and then Body Press to break through things. Also, very much like that Dragon Tail's the same priority as Whirlwind from Hippo. So, in the case where Hippo came out after Gudra had set up, I was able to force it out before it forced me out. But then did realize Terra Fairy posed a little bit of an issue to the set or the Gardevoir. So did bring Sludge Bomb as an option to hit things on the special side or the poison side as well. But yeah, I thought the Gudra had a pretty good chance. If it got a chance to set up Acid Armor, would take less than a third from most things, and hit them back pretty hard, maybe boost back up. Could clean, maybe could be a bulky breaker in the mid game. Really depended how the battle ended up going.
Yeah, no, this is a real cool team. I love that Gudra set. I always, whenever Amon gets something like Acid Armor or Iron Defense, I always, pretty much in every matchup, I look like, is this something that I could pull out of my pocket? Love to see that you're making use of that, and a very cool kind of physical Gudra set here. No Draco Meteor. Very cool to see that. Other rest of the team looks good. I think this Armor Rouge is very cool. The Scarf, Destiny Bond, and Trick, love it. The only kind of comment I have on this team overall is that maybe it's a little bit reliant on Zapdos getting the weakness policy boost. If you don't get that, I'm wondering if you might you certainly have the rest of your team can still put out plenty of damage, but I'm not sure if you don't get that. I'm not sure exactly what your win condition is in the game, but I think still a very well built team. Nate, you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think Gudra was the one I was expecting least to come in the entire matchup, which I obviously didn't expect a set like this either on that. So kudos and finding an interesting way to make this work in the matchup. I think there are some interesting things here. The Gudra with its whole set, the Enamorous having Tailwind and Taunt, the Slowking running Toxic, but really those defensive pieces, I feel like my team is well built to take on. It's really about avoiding those pitfalls in the offensive mons, and otherwise, I think my team is actually pretty well set up against this.
All right. Well, now that we have seen all 12 mons that are coming to the match, the only thing left to do is hop into that match and see just how everything played out. We'll jump into it right now. And here we have the match proper. What about you guys? Nate, looking at this kind of team preview, do you have any initial thoughts on the match?
I mentioned before that I was very surprised to see the Gudra and not see the Inteleon. I think was another big part there. I'm very excited to see something like Excalibur go in, not even necessarily needing Dragon Dance to go in too hard. Only the Zapdos outspeeds it. So that is pretty nice. Also helps out the Gardevoir there too. Wish I'd run a little bit of speed on that. Didn't really touch on it. That was max HP on the Gardevoir. Didn't really expect to need to outspeed something like Gudra. So Gardevoir looks like that can go in pretty hard here as well. Still gonna need a little bit of chip to get something like the Sneasel to sweep, but looking pretty fine on my end.
All right. And what about you, Steve?
Yeah, saw the mons I expected. Certainly have the ability to sweep through. None of the physical walls being here definitely makes Zapdos a lot better. Not needing to again chip down anything like the Hippo or the Wochien or the Fortress. All sorts of those big defensive walls not here. So Zapdos looking good so far. Let's see if he can keep looking good.
All right, now we do have the opportunity for the double Slowking lead. We don't have the opportunity for the double turn one chili reception, unfortunately, but we will see what we end up with. We're going to see one Slowking and Donphan come out. You guys
Boo.
want to talk a little about why you chose these particular leads?
Yeah, I did kind of expect Donphan to show up here. That was the most obvious was to set up Stealth Rock turn one without me having anything to stop it. So I figure let's at least just get off a strong surf. Let's get that chip damage into it and see what we can do.
Yeah, and he certainly caught me there. Definitely was hoping to get Stealth Rock up. Was kind of debating if he would go with the Sandy Shock's lead as a early pivot, in which case Zapdos might have been good to just try and sweep like that from the beginning. But otherwise, getting the rocks up, hit Slowking, which isn't a great matchup, but we'll see how it goes.
All right. So turn one knock off here, not going for the rocks yet. As the surf comes out, breaks the sturdy. Pretty nice there. I'd probably say that turn goes to Nate there, getting that nice damage off on that physically defensive Donphan. There is nice. Steve, any reason why you didn't click rocks that turn?
In this case, I was a little bit curious what the Slowking set was, trying to just get some information there. I know in our last matchup he had brought a setup sweeper, so I certainly wanted to kind of gauge what it was and not give it a necessarily a free turn to do whatever it wanted. Wanted to try and punish it, and in return got punished by the Culper Berry.
Of course, the Culver Berry, one of only two items to do something once it gets knocked off. Nate loving the Rocky Helmet, but going for the Culver Berry here this time.
Shout
Now
out
we're
to
going to
Rocky
see
Helmet.
Protect for the Scouting and Chevy Reception out into the Baxcalibur. Nate, were you expecting a Protect, or was that just kind of the safe middle ground move?
That seemed like a safe move to me. I figured either rocks or something like EQ would come out. Ideally EQ, and then I can just heal it all back up with Regenerator. I didn't really think there was that much to do there. I didn't think Steve would stay in and let this just go down to another surf or risk that. So that seemed like a pretty safe chili out into anything. Picking backs felt a little bit risky here, but seeing how especially defensive this was, I could have potentially tried to get a free hit off with Gardevoir, but I don't know the Glow King's defensive investments yet. So actually, why not just go backs now?
All right, makes sense to me. Out into the Glow King, we're going to see the Icicle Spear come out, get for 5 hits, do over half to that, getting big damage there. We're then going to see Protect as Nate goes for the substitute there. Very nice position here for the Baxcalibur here. Nate, you want to talk about your play there a little bit? Going for the Icicle Spear, not the sub or the Dragon Dance there initially. Playing it a little bit safe, not necessarily going for the sweep right away.
Icicle Spear seems just so free. Even something like Armourouge coming in weak armor, please, I'll get those hits off on a -1, -2, -3 defense, even with the resist there. It just seemed like an incredibly free move to click. I don't need to commit to anything quite yet, so why not? Seeing Glow King eat that up relatively well, but not that well. Another 5-hit would finish it off, so kind of the same as turn 2. I don't just think Steve would risk that just going down immediately. No need to click that once again. Let's just get the free setup move that I have on the set for a reason.
All right, and Steve, kind of in this position, I know we've got that Armourouge in the back, whose job it is to kind of take care of this Baxcalibur, and certainly still can. Are you feeling much pressure from it, or are you feeling kind of like you've got your plan, let's stick to it?
Definitely feeling some pressure here. I feel like I've lost every turn so far here. The Baxcalibur is getting its chance. Did a quick double check that in fact Destiny Bond does go through substitute, so that is looking like kind of the one and only way here. And better try and figure out that before the Baxcalibur gets too far out of control here.
All right. We're going to see that Ice Body give it a little bit of healing there. Switch out into the Armourouge. Earthquake doing a lot of damage, but the bulk on that, the weak armor pops off, and we're doing fine there. Nate, why do you go straight for the Earthquake there over something like Dragon Dance?
The number one thing I wanted to do was walk away from that engagement with the sub up. I figure I'm still in a great position to get one KO no matter what. Let's just get damage off on something, whether it's this or something else. and ensure that we have the substitute while also bringing Steve down on. That should mean that I get 2 KOs with this one go round of Excalibur and continue to press the advantage there, right? So Glow King, we saw that it was not Chuckaberry because it restored some HP. Figured I was relatively safe. If one of the flying mons comes in, do you really think it's going to come in? Whenever you know I'm not choice select and I have the ice move, very unlikely that they would come in Earthquake just as free as the Ice Skull Spear was the turn before.
All right, that checks out. So now we have this Armor Rouge, and it goes for the Destiny Bond. Earthquake comes out, and Destiny Bond does its job, takes out that Excalibur behind the sub, and now we've got Sandy Shocks and Zapdos. Certainly, that was a big momentum swing in your favor, Steve. How do you feel about that?
Definitely felt great there. There were certainly some concerns because of the combination of weak armor and scarf. I was definitely faster, but definitely a prediction game there. If he went for a Dragon Dance that turn, after losing the HP, the Armor Rouge was, basically ruined there. So something like that would have been devastating to see. But considering I had already spent the HP in Armor Rouge and there was no second chances, this was the turn to do it.
All right, yeah, taking a little bit of a gamble there because yeah, if you reveal the Destiny Bond and he goes for the Dragon Dance, he's looking pretty good there. But Nate, you just went for the Earthquake and it paid off for Steve. Surely, I think we were all watching this battle, shocked and really excited about that Destiny Bond play. What were you thinking in this match as it happened?
I was thinking, not again. Those of you familiar with Season 8 semifinals, about the same thing happened to me, except my Fire Psychic type was behind the sub Victini there, and it did get got by a Destiny Bond for my Frostlass, which pretty much ruined my chance in beating Chad in those playoffs. Looking back, I think it was pretty obvious. You go for a Dragon Dance, and if you get 2 off, as I had said in the team preview, that's basically game there. Don't know if +2 would be able to KO the Terra Fairy Gudra in one hit, but I got a little too caught up in how well the first 4 or 5 turns were working there, as in I don't need to risk anything. Let's end the encounter behind a substitute, and I could do that, at least get the KO there that turn. So I just kind of blindly went for it. But really, seeing the amount of defensive investment after that Earthquake should have keyed me that even if you were to break this up, he shouldn't be able to do that much damage after a second D dance. So I really should have just said, in 2 turns I will be at +2/+2, and good luck, Steve. Unfortunately, just went for it, and hindsight's 2020. Dang, should have checked the moveset, huh?
Yeah, all right. Well, now we have Sandy Shocks against Zapdos. This is the exact situation Steve was prepping for. Makes sense that Nate, you go out here into the Sandy Shocks as a pivot. Could have maybe gone Slow King instead, but Sandy Shocks out here. And walk me through a little bit about the choice, because obviously both of you guys were talking about in the match. I remember kind of, is the other person scarfed? And Nate, you also had the thought, you had the decision between Volt Switch and Thunderbolt. So you have any kind of thoughts there about, kind of how you ended up coming to your decision on this turn?
Not just those, but I was definitely worried about clicking Earth Power or switching to Slow King as well, hard on a Dawn Fan coming in as well. If you were Predict Time Scarf, that would be an opportunity for him to set up rocks pretty easily there. Uh, Looking back on it, obviously you can say a lot of things. Man, it would be nice if this was, say, modest to get a little bit more damage on the Volt Switch. T-Bolt would have been so good or free here, but also knowing that Glow King could just kind of eat that up. It felt like Glow King was the safest middle ground play for him, so I was really considering Earth Power really as the second option, but Volt Switch to keep momentum against the Glow King seemed like that made the most sense to me. Really, in the replays, the one thing you don't get is the amount of time that is taken between turns. I know I took my sweet old time with this particular play, as I believe I said out loud. I don't know if you understand how much this particular turn matters. I don't think I understood how much this turn mattered either, though.
Yeah. All right. Well, Steve's in here with that Zapdos right here. Like you said, kind of the Armor Rouge was in, and that was kind of your shot, so you took it. Was this just kind of following up on that? Were you expecting the Sandy Shocks and just trying to go for game here?
Yeah, was definitely expecting the Sandy Shocks, and as I mentioned, without any of the physical walls, Zapdos looked good. This is another opportunity here on the blind double. Just like the leads, thought Sandy Shocks would be a reasonable choice for him to go in for the pivot, and felt like a great chance for him to Volt Switch me and get me exactly what I want. So went for it.
All right. Well, let's see if that happens. And out comes the Volt Switch. does 2/3 out. There's the weakness policy boost. In comes the Slowking, and agility goes up. So that went exactly how you wanted it to, Steve. How did that damage and stuff kind of compare to kind of the calcs you'd been doing before the match? And were you kind of feeling really confident here at this stage?
Yeah, that did pretty much in line with what I was calculating against. I'm pretty sure that was towards the higher end, but I forget the exact calcs. But still very reasonable. I know I had the best odds possible of living the combination of moves I was worried about. So all in all, seems fine. I got set up, and with having the idea about especially like the Slow Kings investment, I'm feeling quite powerful and can at least pick up 1 KO here at the very least.
All right, and Nate, I have to hate to ask you how you felt after the Baxcalibur going down, and now after procking the weakness policy. But when you saw that proc, what were you thinking here?
I thought that's very cute. There are a couple ways around this. We can just try and fish for some recoil here and be able to just come back in with Sandy Shocks and revenge it real easily. Even if he gets to switch out for free, I will have gotten out into the Dawn Fan to eat up an electric hit. At least we've gotten the weakness policy out. The agility, I think, is what very much concerned me. I made a mad dash over to those calcs to look at Arcanine and how much that would do, and discovered the same thing that Steve did in his own team building prep. Kudos to that, by the way. But oh man, now starting to look around. Where's my helmet? Where's my defensive mon? Where's the modest nature on Sandy Shocks? Where is any of it? And now really the only hopes I have are, I think, a crit on extreme speed, or try to just get up as to what I was hoping here on this turn. Hopefully get a little bit of recoil chip from the Brave Bird. If it doesn't outright KO it, it will at least get it in range of extreme speed.
All right. Well, we see the acrobatics come out instead. Guaranteed one shot there on the Slowking here into Arcanine, but it's a bait as you go into the Gardevoir. Gets that Defiant, and the Thunderous Kick going to give it a Defiant boost here, actually. Of course, probably not going to play a huge role, but very funny to see. And Nate, I feel like I talked to you. That was kind of one of your last gambles there, trying to bait a close combat, get maybe a defense drop to get the E-Speed to KO.
Yeah, that is exactly correct. Yes, the Brave Bird give it didn't work out. Okay, acrobatics, that makes sense. That makes sense. That makes sense. But Thunderous Kick hasn't been used all season, so we'll make sure to bait that in with one mon here. Swap it out. Two of the mon I thought would probably put in the least amount of work from here. I don't know if Gardevoir was right, but it was a little bit focused on getting Sneasel to sweep here at the end at least. Hopefully that would come into play. And it sure isn't close combat either. So now he cannot lower his stats. He does not take any recoil chip. It's a little bit hairy here, huh?
Yeah. All right. And Steve, how are you feeling here? Seeing the Arcanine come out immediately there, you're probably worried about the potential of a banded E-Speed, but you kind of seem locked in at this point as far as if this is going to happen, it's going to happen now.
Oh yeah, so there's no switching out. As soon as saw the Sandy Shocks, I knew Zapdos was staying in till it fainted. So yeah, if he had the choice band, he certainly could hit it, and that kind of gives me the information. Breaking through Slowking would have been great from Zapdos, and then play it out from there. But yeah, as he switches, definitely comes to the same conclusion of him that he's not banded, and he sees the E Speed's not doing it. As I'm sitting here facing the Arcanine, in my mind, I definitely predicted the Gardevoir switching in, tracing my ability, and then getting that attack boost. Was something very funny I was thinking was going to happen, and it ended up did happening. Did take a quick look, and Gardevoir does get Shadow Sneak. Doesn't pick up the KO from here typically. Maybe he's choice band max attack for this exact situation. Seems unlikely, but the combination of Shadow Sneak with an E-Speed, of course, could do it. So we'll just have to see if that is what the Gardevoir has in mind here.
All right. And here, acrobatics come out. No Shadow Sneak from the Gardevoir. Easily KOs. Sandy Shocks out again. Outsped with the agility. Thunderous Kick goes down. Arcanine here. We're on our last legs here. E-Speed, no crit. Living on 6% there. Thunderous Kick comes out. Takes out that, and it's all up to the Sneasel, who's gonna Terra, but just goes down to the acrobatics, and that is the sweep from the Scorse, the Galarian Zapdos there, and a victory to the Wobbuffets. Very well played, but I just have to give a shout out to Steve. Your prep was insane for this match. That Armor Rouge set, and then this played out. This Zapdos played out exactly how you had planned for it. Done your calcs right, lived on that 6%, and I gotta say, very very good job there. And congrats on the win.
Thank you. I'm glad it worked out, and I was able to read Nate's plan and bait him into those moves I wanted him to make, and come out with a big win because of it.
Yeah, and Nate, excellent job by yourself too, but just kind of caught off guard by what Steve brought, and that sometimes that's just the game we end up playing.
Absolutely. Big shout out to Steve for that prep. That was an awesome Galarian Zapdos set. Something a little bit different from what he's brought. Sometimes you get a little too caught up in the standard sets that people are going to bring and don't really see those other couple options. I think that was a little bit of a weakness for me this season was I only had a couple of different game plans that I went with. So even though I didn't have those big defensive walls, I still kind of played a little straightforward, right? To making sure that there were those turns that for sure were going to go my way, or even if they didn't go my way, didn't set me too far back. And Steve took advantage of those brilliantly. So big shout out to Steve, the season 13 champion.
Yeah, and well, that's the Wobbuffets are our season 13 champions, and after a great match, we're the three of us are gonna transition here, and we're gonna kind of have a little discussion about the season overall and kind of how everything's played out. Okay, so I think Nate, I'm gonna kind of hand the discussion off on you to kind of lead this part, just kind of going over our thoughts on this wacky auction season.
Yeah, wasn't this an absolute blast? I'm pretty happy I brought this up. Whenever I think about the auction season that I had done in the past, I look back on it fondly, and then whenever I actually get into the terrors of the auction itself and the stress involved with it, I have to kind of think, oh gosh, why did I do this? But looking back on it again, boy, the auction is. It was a really neat way to bring people together here for at least a little bit, right? Every Friday night, being able to get on with everybody in the group, see what the bidding wars were going to be, at its peak, I think the auction format was a ton of fun. And Michael, I know you and I took full advantage of that with the amount of mons we had going in and out. We picked up and dropped a ton of mons, for me especially in the lower tiers, just to see what I could get for 1 point for here or there. I think it was a lot of fun, though. I'm curious to see what y'all think about the kind of drop off we had too, going on in the second half of the season once a lot of our teams solidified.
So, yeah, that probably has a lot to do with a lot of the coaches within the league. Not everyone is as die hard into the league. I mean, a lot of people are, and the league is growing, and I'm very happy in the direction it's going. But not everyone wants to spend every waking hour thinking about the league. So once their team was finished, it was well, I don't need to consider it anymore. And even myself, I certainly kind of felt the same way. I would certainly evaluate every mon every week and think about it, but I didn't go as far as I wanted to at the beginning of the season, where I'd look ahead at my opponent for next week and say, basically build my team there and think, if I pick up one of these mons now, does it, help me? And then, go even further and start building a team for, 3 weeks down the road. And hey, if I drop this mon, am I going to miss it? That type of thing that you can do with something like this, and debating if you want to pick something up, especially with us moving, the team change deadline back to match the auction, could have been very exciting, but I don't think anyone took quite as much of an advantage to that as they could have.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll kind of hop on that. That I think, in addition to yeah, kind of having, your kind of resilience throughout the season to kind of put in the same amount of work week after week as the season starts to drag on. There's also just the nature of building a team. Looking at those later auctions, if we're talking about mons in week 6, 7, 8, if you're waiting till weeks 7 and 8 to have your team quote finished, you're probably gonna be in a bit of a rough spot. So by that midpoint, most coaches had kind of their teams more or less kind of figured out, and the auctions you were looking at then for that point were more kind of incremental improvements, but no two mons are the same. For dropping one to get another, you're going to be getting some stuff, but you're going to be losing some aspects of that. original Mon. And I think, just towards the end, we saw that where, coaches were just happy with their teams. Sure, there were plenty of good Mons going up every week, but coaches just didn't need them. They were familiar with the teams they had, and so a lot of them were just kind of content to sit on what they had, just picking up extra little things here and there to kind of shore up some last minute weaknesses. But by and large, I think the teams were pretty set by the first half, unless you were me, in which case I just wanted the funny Sun team.
Yeah, I'm a little interested if the vast amount of bonds we made available every week was part of the issue there too. I think every single tier 3 mon became available at one point or another. We only limited a few tier 1s and 2s. This almost feels like something that may be able to go a little bit smoother if we even split us up into a couple different conferences and made it maybe a little bit more competitive to get some of those. I think there are a few things we could potentially touch up in the future. But real quick, one more time around, starting with Steve, is this something that we would look to do again in the future?
Yeah, I very much enjoyed the season, and I think a lot of people did. There were certainly some hiccups, a lot of, especially with the auction itself. But a lot of that we handled with some rule changes starting in week 2. I know there were discussions about getting bots to help out with the bidding, which I certainly agree with, or maybe just its own standalone website for it, something like that. Certainly improvements like that to make it run more smoothly. But overall, it's a great season. To me, especially, it felt very much like a normal season. You get your normal distribution of mons. I understand, especially for you guys who took the most advantage of the auction, it may have felt a little different. And as Michael mentioned, the kind of delayed availability of mons and inability to do free agent transactions does change things slightly. But at least to me, it did feel very much like a regular season with just a little bit of a different draft, as it were, in the auction.
Yeah, I guess, coming from the person who dropped almost enough Mons to make an entire second team, I dropped 10 different Mons throughout the season. It was
Jeez.
definitely a bit more than a regular season to me, but, I did have fun. I think it was a really interesting idea. It definitely shook a lot of things up. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is I don't think we didn't exactly know what we were getting ourselves into with this. And so, as far as I'm sure we could look at doing this again down the line, along with all of the other formats we want to repeat down the line. I think we have a much better idea of kind of the nature of the beast we're dealing with here, and kind of how to tailor it to the uh experience that we want to get out of it. I certainly think, Nate, you and I worked extensively on the distribution of Mons in the auction prior to the season starting, and I think we did a very good job kind of distributing things throughout availability throughout the season. But maybe we do clump things up a little more, front load the auction a little bit, so we have some more of the Malvalue, kind of the more of the niche picks in the end to shore up small spots and kind of small niche cores or something. But we do get more of competition on that kind of juicy stuff at the beginning while everyone's still craving it. Or we drop the number of mons a little bit, have kind of a more of a natural ebb and flow of the quality of weeks, where we can kind of naturally direct people to kind of have more competitive auctions in certain weeks, because we do tailor that. You're going to have a week or two of having less mons, and then every third week you're like, man, I really want to get 3 of these mons when we have some crazy auctions. But I think that's the thing. It's just that if we try this again, I feel like it's going to be a completely different experience.
Yeah, I don't anticipate this happening again in Gen 9 here, but let us know down below if this is something you want to see more of, whether you're part of the Wooper Club League or not. This was something I think we learned a lot from, and we're just going to put even more time, effort, and energy into it to make sure it goes off without a hitch next time as well. But that wasn't the only new thing that we had. There were actually we did not have DLC 2 as a part of, or DLC 1 rather, as a part of this format, but we did have quite a few new mons join the fray as part of this season compared to season 12. I admit I was kind of coming in ready to say, hey, Palafin dominated. I don't know how much really changed here, But really looking at a lot of the new mons that, if you're unfamiliar, came in mostly from Legends Arceus here that we've got to play around with for the first time, as well as a lot of these Galarian mons. Hey, we just saw Zapdos Galar do something. That was pretty neat, huh? The Enamorous Therian coming in for the first time, doing a whole lot of work. Ursaluna and Gudra Hisui from the Noctowls coming in and doing a lot. Even the Sneasel Hisui from my side ended up doing quite a bit. Reggie Drago coming back, 19 KOs. Wow, just great job from Greg there. Quite a few really interesting picks here. The Arcanine Hisui doing a lot, and a few here that were that missed a little bit, right? I never actually ended up bringing the Braviary Hisui. I ended up dropping the Zoroark Hisui. What were some of y'all's impressions of some of the ones that stood out positively or negatively that were new into this season?
So I had quite a few of these mons on my team, and I certainly like them all. The Enamorous Therian, the Zapdos Galar, the Slowking Galar, the Electrode Hisui, all of these mons, new compared to the previous season. And honestly, a lot of them I really enjoyed. All of them I really enjoyed. It's been good to have Slowking back. It really hasn't changed too much. I don't know if I actually played with it in Gen 8, but very much the same there. Similar to the Zapdos, although I don't think us as a league have ever respected Zapdos really. It seems always kind of picked over, and even in the auction format, I was able to get it for quite cheap, and maybe the success this season will kind of push it over the edge. But Enamorous was fun and difficult to use. It's got, fantastic move pool and stats, but the speed and the lack of recovery outside of Drain and Kiss, which really doesn't do a ton, really makes it a little bit infuriating use compared to the normal Enamorous, which, by the way, did nothing thanks to Chad's ability to always sack one Mon every time, every season. Um, there were certainly times when I would have liked the other Enamorous, but I thought I was able to make good use of Therian and its kind of bulkier set, able to try boosting, and especially the weakness policy did really well. But yeah, there are a lot of mons. A lot of the Hisui mons didn't always stick around and do much or come often, but it's great to have all these additional options, and they'll be around for the rest of the generation presumably. So we'll get a lot more chances to see how they interact with the league as a whole.
Yeah, I have to kind of agree on that. I think the thing to say about the new Mons is, whether they did or didn't, do a lot this season, I pretty much would be happy to have any of them on my draft in future seasons. I think they're just versatile, very cool, very useful, and have present a lot of new opportunities. But I think as far as talking about things that shined or didn't shine this format. I think this format really gave us a bit of a new perspective on Terra, because I think it was those tier 3 Mons, the Reggie Drago and the Dreadnought, the Diancie Ben, all those are on the same team. How did that happen? We saw, I think the true value of uh, with the more restricted Terra, getting a really good Terramon just put you so far ahead of other teams. And we had stuff, like Ursaluna, Walking Wake, cool stuff that, got added to those top tiers that, were certainly good throughout the season, but they just didn't do as much for your team as they might have, if we were looking at past formats, just because Terra played a completely different role this season compared to last season. And I think that's really interesting. And, how we kind of tackle Terra in future seasons, it's going to be interesting to see, kind of how drafting and team building in the league, kind of starts to adapt to that.
Yeah, it's interesting you would bring that up. Not quite the transition point I was going to make, but hey, if you're going to present it to me, let's take it. We really should talk about terrestrialization and the tiering system as a whole that we had in place here. I guess to start off with tiers, I know that didn't really want to take extensive tiering action this season. Similar to last time in season 12, we didn't take extensive tiering action, just brought it down to about 5 tiers, and we wanted to see when the next DLCs came out if we want to then maybe do a little bit more extensive breaking down of everything. And then with the announcement of 2 DLCs, we weren't sure if we really wanted to do that, especially with an auction schedule. Keeping it at 5 tiers just seemed to make a lot of sense. And then we restricted Terras from tiers 3, 4, and 5 only, being the only ones allowed to terrestrialize. we are not the end all be all, but I think this would be an interesting spot to start the discussion for where we want to be going in the future with terrestrialization and with tiering. As Michael just brought up, boy, did it matter a lot if you had some really good Terra options. Not even just offensive, although obviously Reggie Drago dominated quite a bit. Diancie was a great pick there too. A couple other mods did quite well, but even some defensive options. I was very happy with the Terra Fairy Wochen and the Moltres from Matt, being able to have some offensive and defensive utility with its Terra seemed like it was incredibly important. I know that breaking down tiers a little bit more could potentially help us separate that gap a little bit and potentially move some mons up a little bit past the point of action or ban specific mons down in those tiers. So they're not 100% tied into each other, but Terras and tiering kind of have been moving forward. We also want to look at if we want to adopt what a lot of other draft leagues are doing with having some designated Terra captains, which would restrict terrestrializing even more. We started off with mostly open Terra in Season 12, restricted it quite a bit for 13. Is this a path that we want to continue to go down to restrict it a little bit more, or is this something we want to leave open as much as possible? So a lot of different talking points here, Steve. I'll let you run with it where you'd like to go.
Yeah, I'll start by kind of counteracting a little bit of what Michael said, with Terra having a bit of a different role. I will say that the mons that were able to Terra was different, but I think comparing Season 12 and Season 13, it was very similar, where in Season 12, we were kind of let down by the Pokemon we restricted Terra from, and those next best mons that could Terra did fantastic. And it's the same thing here, where the best mons that were able to Terra did fantastic with it. Well, some of the mons that were just above being able to Terra didn't. So it's, kind of a trend at this point, and it doesn't surprise me at all to hear that, when we have this Terra mechanic, and if we set an arbitrary line of if you're better than this, you can, and if you're worse than this, you can, it just gives everything worse than that a slight benefit, such that some of those mons are going to be significantly better than mons that option is removed from. And with that in mind, that is always going to be the case in my mind. If we do something tiering based for Terra, if we say, hey, everything above or below a certain point can't Terra, there's always going to be the best mon that can Terra and the worst mon that can't Terra. And that line's always going to exist, and it's really hard to do something about it. That is why I definitely want to try, as you mentioned, Terra captains. I think that is a little bit of a different approach that will it restricts it further. But if you're specifically paying, some sort of draft currency in order to allow Monster Terra, that can, you only have to worry about specific threats being able to do it, and you can pick if you want your, top tiers to be able to Terra. They certainly can, but maybe that's only your one mon that can Terra, or if you have a bunch of lower tiers that can, gives you a bunch of options. Certainly restricts things a little more than what we have now, but that might be a healthier place to go. So that is certainly where I'm at with regard to tiering. Now that by the time the next season starts, DLC 2 will be out, so we'll have a lot more to all of the mons out at least, so we can maybe get a better idea of tiering and get more defined tiers. Although I certainly know that some people prefer this less tier system. I've heard, members of the Beginners League mention it's better for them, as they don't have to worry about such the nitty gritty of how well defined things are. And then I've also heard coaches who like making free agency trades mentioning that with fewer breakdowns, it's easier to make trades back and forth because there's so many more mons in specific point buckets. Whereas if you break it down further, you have to make more free agency trades to make the points work out if you don't keep any spare, which everyone tends to try and spend all their points. So there could be a little bit of optimization there, but some back and forth discussion. I imagine we'll probably end up with more tiers than 5, but maybe not quite all the way up to what we've had before with nearly 20. But we'll certainly see once we have that discussion. It also depends what we're doing. And as mentioned, with DLC 2 coming out right before we plan to start the next season, that also opens up the question of, do we want to try and make a real tier list with, a week of experience with these mons, or do we want to try and maybe do something else for a season, get a little bit more usage with these mons under our belt before we try and make our, starting point for our final tier list of the generation? So lots of questions moving forward with regards to tiering and Terra.
Yeah, no, those were all excellent points. And yeah, you pointed out that yeah, you're right. That's kind of season 12. It was, you know, the mons that did best with Terra did overshadow, yeah, the stuff that couldn't, and we did see that play out again here with regards to kind of, you know, tiering and Terra captains and stuff. I think it's just really opened my eyes that Terra is very complicated for being one of the more balanced mechanics that Game Freak has added to the Pokemon games. Um, it's very hard to draw, you know, a good line as far as tiering things for these, you know, kind of drafts that I think the, you know, kind of line in the sand of, you know, the we did, you know, here tiers 1 and 2 couldn't Terra, and I think that just doesn't cover the kind of range of what Terra can do in the season. And that, you know, I think looking forward, whether or not you know, we have Terra captains or we have, you know, some stuff based on Terra, I think we're going to see a lot more. We're going to see a more complex kind of Terra ban, more exceptions to this rule. You know, things in higher tiers that can Terra or in lower tiers that can't Terra. As well as, you know, or stuff like the Terra captains, where, you know, do we walk it back? You know, we kind of, Terra was very strong this season. Do we kind of keep it where it's at and kind of prune back some of those outliers as far as things that could Terra? Do we, if you're, you know, each team is going to have, you know, one or two Terra captains, and we're going to, you know, do kind of what other leagues do, where, you know, they're listed, you know, they've got like 3 types that they could potentially Terra into. Does that open up enough room for prep and counterplay that, you know, we can let a couple, you know, of the slightly more powerful Pokemon Terra now if they're Terra captains? I think there's a lot of questions to be had there, and I'm not really sure myself about, you know, kind of what direction I would advocate for. I certainly like the Terra captain idea, but I think, yeah, my just greatest takeaway is that a lot of these Terra things are probably going to need to be decided more on a mon by mon basis than, you know, we probably would have liked to have happened.
Yeah, I guess for Terra, I've been all over the place. Started off the gen thinking this is broken. This is going to go the same way as Dynamax, Gigantamax, just not going to be possible or feasible at all. Walked that back quite a bit, seeing how well it worked out, not just in season 12, but overall in like the OU ladder and everything. But now as time continues to go on, I'm still not so sure, right? I see a lot of stuff on the ladder, obviously stuff that we haven't allowed even in the past couple seasons, getting banned because of their ability to Terra. Terrestrialization itself is so powerful. We saw full evidence of that this past season. Yet at the same time, if we're concerned about general power creep for some very good mons, wouldn't it be nice to have some solid Terra options to be able to help handle those top tier mons? I was so back and forth on this as well. This is going to be a very tough, intricate discussion that we're going to have leading up to season 14 and beyond for sure. And as far as tiers, I am very much in favor. I've been pretty vocal about having more tiers. Big fan of having it a little more separated out. Yes, I understand it's not going to be as straightforward one for one, right? Tier drop a tier 3, pick up a tier 3. Um, but I think it's worth having them spread out so we can actually use some more of these mons. I think if tier 3 is relatively large or tier 4 is relatively large, the top, say, half or 2/3 of that is going to be picked up every single time. So much of draft is about finding those good deals within tiers, and you're not going to risk picking up a terrible or garbage tier 3 mon. And hey, if we decide that we want to move up some of those best tier 3 and 4 mons, guess what? Those are going to be the worst tier 2 and tier 3 mons, and no one's going to pick those up anymore either. I love having the wider variety, and while someone in the beginners league may want to have it be more simple and straightforward, I also don't want to punish them for not knowing or understanding what those best deals are within tiers as well. I think if you pick through it with a fine tooth comb as a very good player, you can find those great deals within more tiers. But if you're a beginner and not sure, you're going to get a more kind of guaranteed baseline of pretty good mods there from wider variety tiers. Totally get where everyone's coming from there too. And it's going to be a lot of work if we really want to spread out those tiers a good bit. I think we can find a good happy medium compromise there too. Speaking of the Beginners League, and actually a league that didn't take advantage of Terra that much, Beginners League also concluded just a little bit after this one. Didn't go full into it, but congrats to the Terrifier Heatwave. for finishing a perfect Beginners League season 11-0, dominating with a couple of mons. Shout out to that great Tusk, the Goldango, the Glow King, 2-0, by the way, in season 13, winning in both leagues. The Cragonal even really using Oricorio, those lower tier mons, Luxray in the finals, to great effect as well to them. Pretty successful season in the lower season there, the Beginners League. A lot of new faces there that actually did pretty well. At least one team moving up to the main league, Steve. You two have been big parts of the Beginners League. What say you about this season from them?
Yeah, in general, I'm glad to see it's still going and going strong. Um, it started out with just 8 teams, and we keep getting people, especially within the beginners league, saying, "Hey, I have this friend who would like to join now," or someone else, was finally able to convince their friend, and the beginner league through that mechanism is able to keep going and keep getting new members. And there are certainly some people who are continuing to play the beginner league, and that kind of suits their level of commitment and knowledge of the game, and it works out fine. And some new players come in, not familiar with the franchise and want to start there, or sometimes they come in not familiar with draft league and want to start there. I know the big thing on my mind with the beginner league moving forward is maybe doing a little bit more um, talking to people before they start playing in the league. There have been a couple instances the past 2 seasons with both the Corviknight Clobbers and now the Terrifier Heatwave, where there are both players who seem to have, and I believe play like on the ladder some, but just, weren't familiar with draft league, so wanted to start on the beginner league. Well, players like that, after seeing how the two of them did handle the beginner league, generally should start in the main league, where they definitely will struggle some more, and I wouldn't expect them to have fantastic first seasons, but that's more attuned to their skill, where they certainly know how to battle. It's just the process of drafting and maybe team building in a draft that they're not as familiar with. But that aspect is certainly you're able to pick up within a couple weeks, and your first season in general. Whereas the beginner league, it tends to be a lot more about learning how Pokemon works and battling works, and they're kind of want to get a little bit of a better sorting between the two. So that's something I've got to keep my eyes on. But yeah, excited for the beginner league to continue. I've already heard from a couple people that they have someone, one of their friends wants to play, or someone else is like, okay, next season I'm in. So very excited to keep it going, and we'll see how many of these players can eventually move up to the main league and start challenging us there.
Yeah, no, I've been thrilled with the beginner league. When I first talked to Steve about trying to create some sort of beginner league where all these friends we have, where like we talk to them, and we'd love for that to be able to share this hobby with them, but they're just gonna be overwhelmed jumping into it with all of the experienced people. I thought we were going to get one, maybe 2 seasons out of it. And now, we just finished up a great fourth season, and we just keep getting more and more new people interested. I'm really astounded by how well it's taken off. And I'm so thankful to all of the uh, members of the beginner league for trying it out, for joining us in this experience. And yeah, I mean, I think we're certainly finding some great talents there to incorporate into the main league once we kind of really see what they've got. And they've kind of got the experience and the comfort with the format. It's really just so great to see it all working out that way, and really excited to see kind of what it leads to in the future.
Speaking of some folks that have moved up from the Beginners League into the main league, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about a big topic that we had last time, the big five that seem to continuously win compared to the rest of the pack. I think there are some interesting arguments both ways as to whether that gap has widened or narrowed. Looking at the playoffs, the top four of five that made it to the playoffs only lost to each other. So there was no breakup or gaps in there. Once again, only the top four winning against each other or against other folks in the playoffs. At the same time, though, as you mentioned in the very expertly done transition a little bit ago, the number one seed was not one of the top five. The number four seed, not in the top five, and both of those coming up from the Beginners League in their first season and third season, irrespectively. There were a lot of upsets as well. I think a couple that stand out to me, like seeing Joey get a nice win over the Burbs. We got to see the Incineroar taking a nice win over the Noctowls and making it to the semifinals. Those are teams not in the top five, but boy, did they perform pretty well, especially in the regular season, and then a really fun playoff match between Calgary and Cincinnati there too. There are again quite a few different directions you could go with this. Talk about Chad missing out entirely. Talk about Jimmy having a little bit of a down season. Talk about us still winning in the playoffs. But Steve, what catches your eye about the top 4 or 5, or maybe more so the teams that try to catch up to us?
Uh, Yeah, as an overarching thesis for my view right here, I would definitely say that I think the gap is closing between what we've said is the top five and then some of those other teams. Definitely highlighted this season by especially Calgary as well as the Corviknight Clobbers, who both came in, did fantastic, came out with winning records, and Calgary winning 7 of their regular season games and making it to the playoffs. You mentioned, of course, that within the playoffs, any of those, top 5 teams or top 4, because the Seattle had an offseason, not really a fan of the format. But with any of those top 4 teams that were in there, only lost to other top 4 teams, which certainly can be the case. But also, all of our teams have a lot more experience in the playoffs, which can be a very different thing. In the regular season, there is a little bit of an aspect of trying things out or figuring out what works for your team. But once you hit the playoffs, there tends to be a little bit of a kick up in stride, as well as the possibility of rematches by this point, which is very much a different thing. Of course, in the auction format, if it's a rematch of an earlier match, there very much could be very little in common. If you played in week 1, you had like 7 and 8 mods at that point, and by the time you get to the end, you have most of them gone. That's a possibility, but in general, the playoffs can feel very different, and I'm excited to see what happens once some of these teams who have moved up and are getting better in the main league continue to do, or if they're able to take that next step and start picking up some of these key wins. And that doesn't just go for Calgary Corviknight Clobbers coming up from the beginner league and doing well here. That also applies to some of the teams that are perennially in the playoffs. The Akron Agrons really comes into mind. Fantastic in the regular season. They've dropped off a little bit in the regular season. They're no longer like the dominant number one, but they always make the playoffs. And they've had a couple. They just don't perform there. Hopefully they're able to pick it up, maybe pick up some wins here. And then another big story is of course the Incineroar coming back. No longer needing to commit nearly as much time to VGC while still kind of getting that fire back from getting more into VGC. And through the season, it felt like I saw a dramatic increase in his level of play, and it came and resulted in big wins in the quarterfinals of playoffs and a very good game in the semis. And excited to see what the Incinerator are able to do moving forward. And many other teams. Just it feels like we can lose any of these matches, which as someone in the top 5 is terrifying, knowing I'm expected to win and I can't always. But very hopeful for the future of the league that these teams can. It does appear we can lose this. We could throw.
That's my secret, Steve. I always think I can lose. But yeah, no, I think you're definitely right that the gap is kind of closing, and I think it's for a couple reasons. I think it's one, we're getting some of the new blood who not to belittle their individual skills, but I think just the influx of new people, new ideas, ideologies, play styles is going to shake up the league in somewhat, and the fact that these people that are coming in are good players in their own right just kind of magnifies that. I also think we are seeing kind of the effects that new games and new generation, new formats have that make Draft League so exciting. Is we talk about the Calgary Corviknights coming in absolutely dominating the regular season, with what a lot of us thought. We had these starting auction pods. We the kind of old guard pretty universally thought that their selection of pods was not great. And they just came in and absolutely steamrolled that regular season. And I think that goes to but again, all credit to the Corver Knights and their prep and play, but also goes to the we're all still we kind of talked about it when we were talking about Terra. We're still getting used to kind of how that affects the Mons, how that shifts things throughout the tiers in various formats, new DLC Mons. It's just an environment where that standard experience with the game isn't doing as much for kind of the us who have been here in the league for a while. Or that's just not as big an advantage because we're kind of all figuring things out here. Um, and I think that's just as big a part of it that also this auction season, kind of the counterpoint of what we had been talking about with the auctions, where by the end of the season everyone kind of had their teams figured out. uh, the counter of that is at the beginning, a lot of people didn't have their teams figured out, and there were a lot more rooms to, kind of get those upsets when, people didn't have a complete team. When throughout the season, you all constantly have options to adjust and improve your team compared to, a normal season where at the end of the draft, if you just didn't draft as well as everyone else, it's going to be much harder to kind of bring your team up to the level of others with free agencies and trades and stuff. But you do need to kind of front load some of those important decisions in your draft, where this was much more, I think, forgiving with being able to pick up useful and versatile pieces throughout the entire season. So I think there's several reasons that this season in particular we saw kind of that unconventional season as far as performance from some of our top teams, performance from some of the new teams. But I definitely think skill is also just, we're getting more and better people. The people in the league are improving. And, it's, kind of a steel sharpens steel as we get, more of these teams that, aren't necessarily in the top cut, but are, certainly contenders in their own rights. The more of those we get, the more they play each other in these matches where, they're not the, for sure underdogs. The more close matches, the more tricks they get to pull out, the better they're going to get. And, with this season, looking forward to season, we can see, the Close Combat Club, the Summit County Psyducks, other coaches coming back with these, new coaches we're getting. I think it's just a better environment than it ever has been for the members of the league to improve as coaches.
Like the number one thing for me that I see that separates a lot of the beginners league coaches, a lot of the main league coaches, aside from general knowledge of Pokemon in general, is creativity. And I'm so impressed with a lot of creative sets that we've seen, not just coming from the top coaches. Now, Route One Burbs, Michael, you're well known, I think, for having some off the wall sets that end up working out extremely well. Shout out to Utility Umbrella.
Woo!
But we're seeing that come around a whole lot more into a lot more coaches throughout the league too, right? I've prided myself in having at least one or two interesting things here or there. Big shout out to Steve, the Zapdos set in the finals, man. The Armory set in the finals, the EV spreads to go with those items, outstanding and awesome. But now we're starting to see that from other coaches here too. Calgary Corviknights picking the correct Regidrago set seemingly every single week and just having interesting tech moves like putting Pounce on there. That stuff is super cool. Having the correct Palafin set from the Corviknight Clobbers every week. Joey often brings up these amazing sets. I just want them to work against someone really good. Matt bringing different Moltres sets every week has been really cool to see him use that in so many different ways. I think those creative juices flowing and finding those ways to win a matchup maybe you even wouldn't have otherwise. It's been a blast to see a lot of people evolve with creativity in mind and getting very interesting sets that are not just interesting for the sake of being interesting, but can also work with some off the wall stuff, which may, I guess, also tie back to knowledge as well. Then, right? If you have the knowledge that a mon can do something and you have the ability to use it, then why not? Love seeing a lot of new blood, new faces, putting in all that work, as well as some of the old card catching up a little bit here too. I guess the last thing I have for you all is the next format. We have not yet had the season 14 format discussion, and we don't necessarily need to get too far into it. But that's really the only thing I have. So in one more go around, what do you think about next season? And do you have anything else you'd like to discuss about season 13? Steve, on to you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed season 13. Great to win. Looking forward to the league continuing and the skill getting better and hopefully getting bigger and bigger. Um, with regards to season 14 in particular, there are all sorts of ideas being thrown around right now. I know at one point there was a lot of pull for another double season, whether that be I'll say doubles OU 6v6 doubles or maybe VGC draft, something like that. That certainly would be interesting, very different. Also, would give us a good excuse not to have to develop a full tier list for mons that have only been out for a week at that point. So certainly some benefits there. There are some more unique formats being discussed as well. But honestly, I another go at doubles does sound is where I'm leaning right now. There are a lot of mons and moves and abilities that really can shine in doubles that don't really have the chance in singles. Nice to give all of those a chance, get a different view of mons, and in an actual doubles format as opposed to multi battles. Some more moves will actually work, like ally switch and other things that you actually have to have control of both mons instead of just your partner having them. Would be interesting. Also open to doing some more some repeats of our past exciting seasons. I mentioned the multi battle gym leader format could be pretty good right now. Things like that. Um, Lots of great options. Really interested to see what everyone else is thinking. And I tend to be pretty okay with whatever here. So wherever the discussion goes, we'll be very excited to see what next season has to offer.
Yeah, I will always, in format discussion, throw out Little Cup as an option. I just like the funny baby mons. But yeah, I definitely agree that I think we're probably going to be looking at something of a less traditional, singles 6v6 tiered draft, kind of thing. Especially because of that DLC. I don't think any of us are, particularly excited to dig into that and try to come up with something comprehensive and accurate. But I definitely then I'm already looking forward towards, season 15, where I expect us to go a bit more standard, a bit more defined tiers, once we've seen what, other leagues do with the new mons from the second wave of DLC, what happens with them in OU, further just developments of formats, and I think then we're going to see a very a much more cut and dry standard season with a lot of new options to really try to kind of, not to say try hard, but really dig into kind of the mons and the capabilities there. But next season, yeah, looking forward to having something fun. It'll be our first. We're certainly gonna have those that Wave 2 DLC Pokemon in there. Looking forward to getting those, seeing how they shake everything up. And just see where everything goes. The league has been growing in size, but also just capabilities and quality of everything. And I'm always excited to see kind of what each season will bring as far as developments for everyone in the league and the league as a whole. So looking forward to it.
I agree with everything there, aside from Little Cup. I'm also looking forward to the next couple of seasons in succession. Right, I'm open for most anything in season 14, except for Little Cup. But 15, I think, is where we can really shine once we actually get those tiering discussions down. I've been advocating for a multi-draft season, right, where we can go between several different drafts, almost kind of culminate everything together into one big draft season, where you can take the best of your drafts in the playoffs, right? I think we can start working towards something like that, but not quite next season. So I do agree, probably something a little bit off next season, to the chagrin of probably someone like Chad, who already thought this was an off season. Uh, but this could be the kind of break that we need to explore with and try out some of these new months, get everything into our heads a little bit better, get the tiering discussion for season 15 going a little bit better, and move on from there. We'll see what kind of uh, product we can put out there for season 14 if that is the case. But maybe we'll start delving into some more historical content as well, just a teaser for what we may have on the horizon there. That's going to wrap up season 13 discussion for the Wooper Club League. Another big shout out to Steve for winning the league. Waterdeep Wobbuffets, season 13 champions. We'll see you again in season 25 for the pattern holds so far for every 12 seasons. From me, IllLogic, coach the Buffalo Bouffalant. From Steve, coach the Waterdeep Wobbuffets. And from Michael, coach the Route 1 Burbs. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you again on the Wooper Club League channel.